Welcome to Human Design Catalyst 15. Yeah, let's hear it for us for 15. So, just a little business first before I start. So, the topic today is the bonding strategies of the profiles. I know that there's some people who haven't kind of gone over the basics of the profiles, so I'm going to maybe do like a 5-minute intro to profile, just so we know what we're all talking about. But then the next 6 weeks, I'm going to be out of town, and so we're going to have different hosts. Michael's going to host some. Mary Frances is going to host some, and then her friend Jenna wants to host one as well. So check Facebook for the next 6 weeks. Maybe Michael can be the main point of contact. If you would like to host one, Stephanie, you're welcome to, or whoever wants to jump in, and maybe C would be into doing a special Manifestors Corner, Manifestor view of the whole thing. And then the thing I wanted to... So we're talking about profile, and this is kind of a follow-up for last week where we did partnership analysis, and it's really all about bonding with people, and how do we bond, and ultimately, what are our genetic strategies? Because we're all mammals. Mammals have different strategies. In the animal kingdom, there's different, all animals have different strategies to connect, and ultimately we have to reproduce the gene pool. And so last week we looked at we looked at different types. We looked at a lot of different things. This time we're going to be looking at profile. So first I just want to go over what profile is, because I know some people haven't really gone into that before. So a profile is a calculation based on your time of birth, which essentially tells you a set of roles that you can play for others. But it doesn't really tell you anything about yourself other than these are the roles that you're it's almost like a costume. It's like you're cast to play Hamlet. But, one actor is going to really make it their own, and the other is going to do it this way, and one's going to do it this way, and all different ways. But even before you talk to somebody, just the way you carry yourself puts out or projects a certain image of you being able to fulfill a certain role for somebody. And they just think, wow, you can fulfill this role for me. For instance, C is a fourth line profile. And the fourth line is the friend. Universal brotherhood, sisterhood, personhood, friendship. People just see you on the street and just will ask you directions or ask you what to do because they see this person will be my friend. You're somebody I can actually talk to. And there's different, for me, for instance, I have a fifth line. People project the expectations that I can help them or fix things, or because of my particular gate I've been born into, people project success on me. And it's so funny because I've told people this and they go, well, that's not a projection. You're very successful. You're a very successful person. I said, exactly. I've literally had multiple different people who don't know each other in my life who thought I was a millionaire. A millionaire. I'm not even kidding. Just randomly. No, people have thought that. People think I don't work. They think I don't have a job. They think I've retired. They think I all sorts of things, right? They think that I'm this and this and this because it's the fifth line. Now we have a couple other fifth lines here as well. People project on us. They're not always going to project success. They might project something else. But there's a lot of projection with the fifth line, and you have to live up to that projection. And so I'm just going to go over the 5 or the 6 profiles that we have really quick, and then we're going to get into the actual topic, which is bonding and how it looks when we're connecting to other people. Okay. So the first one is the first line profiles, like Danny and also Maya. We just found out you were 1-4. So the other thing is each profile has 2 numbers. One is what is your conscious line and one is your unconscious line. As I go through them, I'll just talk about what people are consciously because you're usually much more aware of that. If you tell somebody about their unconscious, they usually aren't quite aware. But we'll be talking about both because they're important. So the first line is the investigator, and this again has nothing to do with bonding at all. This is purely just how you live your life. That's basically always trying to find solid ground and always wants to learn and learn, and it really just, it wants to kind of, the first line process is driven by the fear and insecurity of not being stable in something, so it really wants to become an expert in that area. And it's driven to kind of climb the ladder of being an expert. Now the second line, like Von Paul and like you, Ayala, doesn't want to play that game as much. It's a totally different process. You might still learn. You can devote your whole life to learning. I know how much you read, and I see Vaughn's learning all the time. But it's very different because it's not about comparing yourself to other people and am I higher or lower than them in a hierarchy. You know, the first line is very authoritarian, deeply authoritarian. The second line is very democratic. It understands that each of us are singular and unique. You know, and so these are evolutionary processes. You could kind of symbolize the first line as the very fundamental first people, the first cavemen and first cavewomen who were just trying to survive. And what they were trying to do was basically learn enough to survive, learn how to make food, learn, you know, it was all driven by fear of the unknown. Don't go over there because there's saber-toothed tigers, you know, don't go out after dark because you can't see, and this and this. And you get this deeply tribal, deeply hierarchical, authoritarian kind of fundamental power structure based on survival. Well, the second line says, I don't want to have anything to do with that. I don't want to be a part of this hierarchy. I don't want to compare myself to others or have a role or be underneath somebody or above somebody or anything. It's this next evolutionary step. So for the second line, it's a totally different mechanism. For them, so the first line is nicknamed the investigator. The second line is nicknamed the hermit. Well, being a hermit is fundamentally about putting up a bunch of barriers and walls and saying, leave me out of it, I trust you to take care of it. You know, I'm going to do my thing, and I have my talent and my gift, and this is what I'm doing. And I'm pursuing my calling. The second line is about calling. Then we get to the third line. We have Daniel, Stephanie. The other interesting thing about third lines is anyone who carries the sixth line will exhibit third line. You'll live out the third line for the first part of your life, basically. It's like you're a Joey in the kind of kangaroo pouch until you eventually grow to be the full sixth line. So even though we only have two third lines here, we also have sixth lines who have lived out the third line process. Well, the third line process is basically not interested in the first or second line. It doesn't want to devote its life to a hierarchical structure of becoming a master or an expert. It doesn't want to just be left alone to pursue its talents or its calling. The third line wants to test everything, which translates to breaking everything and making as many mistakes as possible and basically just trying everything out, testing it. You know, they don't believe if you're a healthy third line, you'll be pessimistic and skeptical of everything because, you know, there's a healthy skepticism. The second line also has a lot of barriers and walls, but it's different. The second line has all these barriers and walls for everything, just kind of like you have to break down the wall. The third line actually doesn't have the barrier. It jumps right in. Oh, I'll try it out. Sure, I'll try this. I'll try that. I'll try this. But what it's really doing is it's trying to test and experiment and see what's worthy, see what stands up to scrutiny, see what it's made of. So I had a ruler that was made by a company called Best Made Company, and my third line friend was trying to break it to see if it really was best made. This is an example of what a third line will do. As you know, as kids, if they get across the room without breaking something, that was a good day. You know, I'm just going to do these really quick, and we're going to go to the actual bond exercise. And if there's any questions, if anybody has these, or if you have your own, you know, ideas about them, jump in. I just want to kind of set the stage that each of us are born into these roles, right? And there's different ways you can play the role. And depending on your configuration, you'll be testing a different area. For instance, Daniel is in gate 12, which is all about trying to mutate the tribe. It's a very hard job, trying to change them, trying to get them to raise their awareness. I mean, I don't envy the third lines. The third lines actually have some of the most responsibility of any of the lines. You know, second line's the hermit. It's basically leave me out of it. The third line's the martyr. They're the ones, it's kind of their responsibility to test everything and try it out. And so Daniel, being born into gate 12, his third line is all about almost like social experimentation. What happens if I push this button? What happens if I push that button? Is this person going to get mad at me? Is that person like, you know, it's like seeing what happens when you try out all of these different combinations of, and ultimately for the goal of mutation, which is a very hard thing to do. It's very hard. When I say mutation, that's kind of a jargon word, but it really just means, you know, trying to start a trend or trying to change somebody's perception. We were talking earlier in the car about how in the census now, the most recent census, 58% of people are in favor of same-sex marriage. And the previous census was, what, 13%. That's an incredible mutation that has taken place at the level of ideology. And it's people it's people like, Daniel who have that 12th gate that are really out there changing the status quo and changing how people. But the way that you do it with the third line is trial and error, testing, experimenting, and basically making mistakes.
Does the third line have an archetype?
Well, it's called the martyr.
The martyr. Okay.
Yeah, the martyr. So the first one's the investigator.
Yeah,
Hierophant's also a nice one. Yeah, you're standing there in front of everything, and you're. Yeah. So, but the martyr, the third lines are the ones that end up finding out all the side effects of new medications and stuff like that. Or if they're in a really bad working situation, they will quit the job first. They'll be the first ones to walk out and say, I won't stand for this. And they'll martyr themselves on behalf. Because really the third line, if the first line is the authoritarian, the second line is the Democrat, the third line is the anarchist. And they don't have anything to build in its place. See, the thing to realize about the third line is they're not here to trial and error and find what works. They're just here to break everything that doesn't work. Because that clears it out. So then people go, okay, back to the drawing board. And then when they're ready for it to be tested again, they bring it back to the third line, back to the drawing board again and again and again. It's the first lines and the second lines who are really building the stuff. The first line's doing it through the 10,000 hours. The second line is doing it through discovery of their natural talents and through being called. The second line really is called out by people. Okay, we get to the fourth line. C is a fourth line. Maya has the unconscious fourth line. Vaughn has unconscious fourth line. You have the unconscious fourth line, Iola. And so the unconscious fourth line, now this is really funny now that we're getting to the ones that are unconscious. The fourth line, whether conscious or unconscious, is basically everybody's friend. That's what I was saying about C. It's like universal brotherhood, sisterhood. It's everybody's friend. It'll be so open and take in everybody. So there's a real conflict when you're a 2-4. The 2-4 is basically a second line that's a hermit that says, leave me alone, putting up all these walls. I don't have anything to do with you. I can't stand all these people. Yeah? Well, yeah, but that's the funny thing is the 2-4 says, I don't want to be your friend. The 2 line does, but the fourth line is like, but I'll actually be your friend. Like, I actually will. It's like a secret. Yeah. It's like an unconscious secret. Like, actually, if you just come talk to me, I will be your friend. It's like, oh, great. So the 2-4 makes a big show out of, what barriers and walls they have. But then there's an unconscious. I actually didn't mention the 1-3. We have 1-3s here. You're a 1-3, Danny. And so you can see that the profiles have a built-in conflict inherent to them. Being a 1-3 means that Danny consciously wants stable ground, security. First line is inherently insecure, so it's looking for mastery and hard work, and it's a fixed line, so it wants consistency, it wants order, it's authoritarian, and it just wants to have that stable job, the stable relationship, the stable house, the stable career trajectory, knowing its place in the hierarchy. It wants all this stuff. The third line, unconsciously, is an anarchist that wants to burn it all to the ground and experiment with everything and move to a foreign country and start over and quit and break and all that stuff. So the third line is kind of constantly wanting, and we'll see when we get to the bonding strategies that the third line is the one that's the most at a genetic level about genetic variance and difference. So these are people from extremely different gene pools coming together, and we'll get to that next. I'm just kind of going over the normal, customary, just so we're all on the same page. Okay, so then we get to the fourth lines. I'll use you as an example C, because you're the 4-6 that we have here. So the fourth line is not interested in the first, second, or third. The fourth line doesn't, let's talk about, for instance, you're the assistant director or assistant to the directors of Currents New Media, this amazing new media festival. Well, the first line, all they're going to want to do if they're given that job is learn everything about new media. They're going to spend 10 years learning, and they don't even think about other people or anything else. They just want to learn about. You want to become an expert on it. Danny, you've devoted so much of your time. I'm not sure about you, Maya. Maybe you've done the same, where you become an expert in certain areas and you lock in and you learn. The first line is like maybe talk to me in 10 years, but until then, I'm going to learn everything there is about it. And I don't feel comfortable yet. I'm still insecure in being able to present this to the world because I'm still researching. I'm still investigating. And they'll just keep investigating. Well, the second line, again, doesn't want to be bothered with that, but they have their natural talents, and they're very comfortable in their own skin, and they just want to kind of basically practice. It's like first line is theory, second line is practice. Let's put it into practice. Just do it. Let's just start doing it. The third line is hold up. I'm going to test this. What happens if we do this like 1,000 times in a row. Does it break? What happens if you do it this? What happens if you do that? Well, the fourth line doesn't want to be bothered with testing or any of that stuff. The fourth line just assumes that it's good. So it's this assumption, which, by the way, is, in this case, correct. You're really lucky that you've been aligned to something like Currents, that Currents is the best new media festival in the world. Mm-hmm. And it's as simple as that. You're not going to question if it's the best. You're not going to test if it's the best. You're not going to do a bunch of think tanks to research it, or you're not going to just, it's just this assumption that it is the best thing. Now, if some fourth lines think that the world is flat, and all they do is go around saying that the world's flat, and they'll never question it, and they'll never analyze it, and they'll never test it. This is what happens when you get to the fourth line. It's externalizing something. What's that?
This is why I'm obsessed with flat earthers.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're obsessed with them. You're fascinated by them because they're doing that fourth line thing. But the fourth line is examining something, and it's in harmony to the one. What it's examining is how's the best way to deliver the message, how's the best way to externalize it. The fourth line is a real poster child. That's the funny thing. In some ways, you are Currents. You're like the mascot of Currents. You just externalize Currents. You're just like, I am from the future, and I exist in this, realm of digital media, of the realization of digital media. So a fourth line theme is externalization. But anyway, I hope it's becoming clear of the picture of this, that each one is kind of not concerned with the previous processes. It simply has a new challenge. It's like, once you've gotten stable on something, what do you do? Well, you put it into action. Once you've gotten into action, what do you do? Well, you make sure it's working. Once you make sure it's working, what do you do? You externalize it, you advertise it. Yeah.
How does an unconscious fourth line?
Well, the unconscious fourth line, it's still externalizing. It's still putting out something. It just doesn't necessarily know what it's putting out. There's this kind of New Age maxim of what you put out is kind of what you get back. That's only true for the fourth lines. It really is, because the fourth lines, if you're putting out something really negative, you're kind of, and everybody sees that, you are kind of creating what you put out. And if it's unconscious, you might not realize what you're putting out there. You might just not be aware of it. You might be saying consciously, leave me alone, but you're putting out, I'll be your friend. Now, there are a couple things I'll go over with the fourth line, so I'll go more into depth when we get to the, I think we'll do a little break before we start the actual lecture, because I don't want to overwhelm people. But basically, we're going through them now in a non-bonding sense. Then we're going to go through each one again. We started the one again, or started the six, either way, it doesn't matter. And we'll go through the bonding strategies. But the one thing I will say with the fourth line is, fourth line's nicknamed the opportunist. There's no negative association to this word that should be conveyed, because opportunist doesn't mean a selfish opportunist. The opportunist is simply somebody who is there to build their network of friendship and to take opportunities. Now, for the fourth lines, because they're so open, because they have universal brotherhood, sisterhood, they're so open to take everybody in, it's really, really important that they have people in their life vetted by their friends, vetted by people that they trust, that are not necessarily strangers. So that's the thing that I found, is that especially 4/6s, but also 1/4s, are going to not necessarily be aligned with the right people. 4/6s, it's especially the case because the sixth line goes through its third line phase, where it's making tons of mistakes and experimenting and trying all this different stuff out. Let's see what this is like. Let's see what that's like. And what happens is a lot of 4/6s end up in their 20s, teens and 20s, getting to know a lot of criminals. And it's amazing how many 4/6s end up being a criminal. Yeah, because, so here's the thing for the fourth line. The fourth line can only ever really, it's kind of like chess, where there's different moves you can make, and there's certain restrictions. And the fourth line can only make moves within its network. And it's the opportunist because it can only make moves within its opportunity network. So I have a friend in Seattle who's a fourth line, who's a barista, and she really wanted to be a queer youth counselor. I told this one before, it's this kind of a go-to story. And she asked me, well, how do I do this? And I said, well, you need to know somebody who has the job you want. She's like, well, I don't know anyone like that. How do I meet him? Well, just start telling your friends you want to meet somebody who has that job. And she's like, can't I just send out resumes? I'm like, no, you're a fourth line. Like, all of her friends were baristas. Her housemates were baristas. She'd hang out after work with baristas. Like, she literally lived with 3 baristas. And she's complaining about she doesn't want to be a barista anymore. And I'm like, look, if all your friends work at a factory, you're going to work at a factory. This is the fourth line thing. It is building up a network of opportunities. And there's a lot of really funny nuances to it. You can go very deep in these. Like, as soon as you provide something to the fourth line is known for being very magnanimous, but they're almost like a Robin Hood. They're magnanimous to those who don't have the opportunities. So say you have a swimming pool. Well, the fourth line is going to invite all their friends to have access to that swimming pool, but they're not necessarily going to give back to you. They're going to almost see you as the privileged one that they have to take from to give, to distribute to the underprivileged. It's funny how that works. Okay, I want to go through these really quick, then we'll do like a 10-minute break, and then we'll do the actual lecture. So the fifth line, so what does it mean to not care about any of the previous lines? Right? That's what's so funny about this. Well, the fifth line doesn't care about building a network. It doesn't care about building up a strong friend group. In fact, for the fifth line, familiarity breeds contempt. The longer you're exposed to somebody, the more exposed you are, the more they start to pick through your cracks, and they start to henpeck you and gossip about you, and it builds up all of this drama and stuff. And that's really impractical. What the fifth line is here to do is essentially, there's a great line from the I Ching. This is from the Richard Wilhelm translation of the I Ching, talking about the fifth lines. And it's saying, the fifth line is here to provide practical provisions in times of crisis. So it's here to basically have a solution during a time of crisis. Now, the way this works is that the fifth line actually works best with strangers. And the fifth line is able to project. I use projection in both senses. We talk about psychological projection where somebody projects onto you. They project expectations on you. They project certain things on you. But it also goes the other way, like projecting your voice. You project an image of yourself out to the world. You try to show, and all of us do this, but the fifth line is very, very aware of how they appear. So the fifth line is the kind of person who will write a letter and then modify it and going, no, that word makes me appear a little too desperate, and this word makes me appear inconsiderate, and the second line, the second and the fifth line are both harmonies, just like the first and the fourth, second, fifth, third, sixth. There's harmonies there. So the second line also projects out an image of itself. The difference is that the second line ultimately is there to live its life and to put things into practice. So it's also practical, but it's basically there to say, I'm just going to live it. That's the second line. The fifth line is there to kind of help others live it, or help others. It's really the difference between being called and calling. The second line is here to be called. So the second line is just going to be like a hermit, leave me alone, I don't want to do anything. And then somebody keeps calling out to them, usually a fifth line. Finally, they get through, and then the second line goes, okay, fine, I'll do it. I'll become the missionary. I'll do it. Well, the fifth line is not really here to actually do the work or it is a lot of work. Believe me, it is. And if you're a generator, you're going to be doing a lot of work. But it's more here to solve the problem or solve the crisis. It's kind of like the fifth line's not here to do day-to-day stuff. It's here to be there during a time of crisis only. So it's kind of like I think it was in ancient Greece where the generals, and other places too, would be kind of retired in the countryside with their family. Then someone would come to them and say, hey, would you help us? And they say, okay, we're having a crisis. What can you do? And the fifth line comes and says, all right, I'm going to step in and kind of help out and then go back behind the curtain. I don't want to go into the fifth lines too much, but I'll just say that in terms of the evolutionary process, what they're here to do is to universalize, which is a step above externalizing of the fourth line. The fourth line can be incredibly influential. The fourth line is what grows in influence through its friend network. And in fact, the fourth lines can set the trend, and they can have this tremendous influence on people. The fifth line is trying to get something into the kind of universal canon. They're trying to have their masterpiece, literature book be added to the list of great books. They're trying to get their own Wikipedia page for something they've contributed, or whatever it is. They're trying to universalize a formula. They're trying to, so it's really a big project, and most fifth lines don't do that. They really don't. But that's kind of what they're here to do, and that gives them a larger-than-life air. They can be kind of, in the I Ching, they're called the exalted lines. So they can, if they get a big head about it, they can kind of puff themselves up as the savior and all this stuff. And then it's usually when they crash and burn. The fifth line is nicknamed the heretic because they're often being chased out of town with pitchforks or burned at the stake because they didn't fulfill on their promise of the solution didn't work or whatever it is, right? So they're here to come with a solution. If it doesn't work, and you throw them in the pit. Okay, finally, the last one, then we'll take a little break, is the sixth line. And the sixth line is in some ways outside of profile. It's like in some ways the fifth line really is the last profile. Because the sixth line already has 1 foot into the next hexagram. It's 1 foot into the first line. It's leaving the past behind it. The sixth line is kind of like the ultimate been there, done that, ho-hum, like denouement after the big climax of the story. And the sixth line is really, because of that, they have a really unique vantage point. They're nicknamed the role model, and it's not that they're a role model of a certain thing. It's not like the role model fisherman or the role model artist or the role model. They become a role model because if everything goes well, then by their 50s, they will have gone through this whole process of life where the first 30 years or so of their life, they're deeply in that third line process. Then they basically go up on the roof of the house, so to speak, because the sixth line is the top line of this hexagram. So if you look at the I Ching hexagram like a house, the sixth line is like the very top. They kind of go up on the roof where they can see everybody and they're distant and they're detached and they observe. And then in their 50s, they kind of come back into life and they can bring their observations to others. But there's always a little bit of a remove. The sixth line is always a bit removed. It's a little bit distant. And it's kind of like the fool on the hill. But they can be so objective and have no agenda. And so in a way, it's like the fifth and the sixth lines make their own kind of pair. And you can see these interesting pairs. And the fifth line, like myself, is extremely passionate. And it's really trying to galvanize people with its own very subjective, biased views. And it's almost like gambling with that and saying, like, I'm betting that I'm right. And if I am, then I'll be lauded as a hero and a savior. And if I'm wrong, I'll be chased into town with a pitchfork. So the fifth line is putting their reputation on the line every single day, every step of the way. They're gambling with their reputation, making all these bold claims and assertions and going out there and kind of trying to get something out there into the collective, trying to like birth a movement into the collective. Now, they don't always do that, and in fact, the joke is that a fourth line can tell a lie and it'll go halfway around the globe, and a fifth line can tell the truth and nobody hears it. But because it's so hard for the fifth line, again, we don't have influence. We're just trying to like sell people based on our pizzazz. But then by the time we get to the sixth line is so objective and disinterested and kind of observing everything, at least by the time they're in their 30s, that they're become really trustworthy. And so I'll just end on this little kind of joke about it. If the fifth line comes into town and says, hey, there's a flood coming, you all have to move, the flood's going to be here, then the townsfolk go to the sixth line, who's this fool on the hill outside of town, and says, should we trust this person? I mean, what, you say the flood's coming. And then the sixth line looks and goes either yes, at which point they celebrate the fifth line as a hero, or no, and then they go, all right, I'll get the stakes and the, and the fire, and we'll burn them, So the sixth line is really the one that's kind of consulted, almost like the, I don't know, I was thinking when I was watching Midsummer. Huh?
Financial advisor.
The financial advisor. Well, hopefully you have a sixth line financial advisor. You're lucky if you do, yeah. But, but you want a fifth line in that time of crisis, because the sixth line is just going to say, well, objectively speaking, you should never have done this to begin with, or,
Why did you even build your thing here?
Well,
What are you thinking?
and also the fifth line theme is snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. So the fifth line is always going to try to save the day, no matter how bad it is, no matter how impossible it seems. And that's why the fifth line is kind of the theme of the hero or the savior, which can get them into a lot of trouble because they can start to think that they have this special ability when actually it's only if it's practical. If you're a fifth line, the advice I can give you is keep it practical. It has to always be practical or people will be disappointed. Same with this. If I start going off in all this flowery poetry, yes, big whoop, but I'm wasting your time. It has to be practical. And so in part two, I'm going to get to some of the practical parts.
Do we have all of the lines represented here?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure we do. Yeah, we have 2 first lines, 2 second lines, 2 third lines, 1 fourth line, 3 fifth lines, and 2 sixth lines. And I'm just talking about at a personality level. Of course, if you carry this line unconsciously as well, it also works. You're just not really
Oh, way to go.
noticing
Even
it.
distribution. Basically.
Yeah.
Wait, who's
Michael.
What's the unconscious before?
The unconscious fifth line, which we have 2 of those here, 3 fives here. The unconscious fifth line, okay. This one's pretty funny. Okay, so basically all of the expectation, everything is still operating, but they just don't realize it. And I'm not trying to be rude here, but I'll tell a little example of it. So the third line, all the third line really wants to do is experiment, test stuff out. And their fifth line, they're still putting this aura out there. In fact, the fifth line is a seducer, and we'll see that when we get to the bonding strategies. The fifth line is very seductive. The 3 fives are very seductive with their bodies, while they might even deny it. I'm not seducing. What are you talking about? And then they put their arm, but very seductive. Even the way they dance can be very seductive. I wish Jocko were here. He's such a good dancer. I'm seduced by his dancing. I'm enthralled. I could watch Jocko dance for hours. He's a 3-5. Yeah,
Well,
he's a 3-5. Oh yeah. No, so the unconscious fifth line is very seductive, but it's more than that. It's all the stuff I'm talking about, the expectations being placed on you. How many times have 3-5s gone, well, I didn't know that that's what you expected. Wait, you expected me to be monogamous? Wait, you expected me to be, or like whatever it is. I don't want to make it. Although there is a connection between third line and promiscuity, as we'll get to here. And again, no value judgments. But the third line's an experimenter. It wants to experiment. It wants to try everything out, at least once. But okay, I'm being a little bit facetious. But the fifth line, all the expectation stuff still operates to where other people are still expecting you to save the day. They're expecting you to fix the problem, and they're expecting you to do all this stuff. And I've even I had this conversation with my friend who's a 3-5 in Seattle, and he goes, "Well, I'm pretty aware of people's expectations of me." And I was like, "Yeah, but didn't you say that job the other day? They thought it was going to come in at this budget." He's like, "Well, I never agreed to that." And I'm like, "Yes, you didn't agree to that, but as a conscious fifth line, I can tell you, I know that what you agree to is not what people are expecting, and I'm continuously attending to their expectation." So it's the conscious line is what you're paying attention to. If you're a first line, you're constantly sussing everything out, investigating it. You know what I mean? If you're a sixth line, yeah, you're a 6 too.
Okay.
Yeah. If you're a sixth line, you're kind of looking at things objectively. If you're a third line, you're looking at things skeptically and pessimistically. Tell a third line, "Oh, it's going to go great. It'll work perfectly the first time." They will just laugh. They will laugh till they have tears about how silly that is for you. Third lines love it. Part of them, you have to admit it, you third lines, part of you loves when things are just absolutely destroyed, the anarchy of it. You just love when like the thing falls apart. And that's good because it means it wasn't built well. There's a reason for it. So, but I was going to say about the third line, so imagine our 3-5 gets hired for a job. Now, the fifth line is such a powerful, seductive field that the boss immediately looks at this 3-5 and goes, "This person's going to solve all my problems. They're going to save it. The company's been going this way. They're going to bring it back up this way." And a couple months go by, and what the third line's been doing is testing everything. And it's actually true that third lines are incredibly good for businesses. They're so good for businesses because they find everything. They find all the inefficiencies. They find all the stuff that breaks. They find all the edge cases. They're like the perfect QA team. They find all the flaws. They don't fix all the flaws. They find them. So at the end of the 2 months, the person goes, "Well, our ordering system's only set up to handle 800 orders a day, but you put 1,200 through on Friday." And they'll go, "Well, yeah, I was seeing what would happen." And everything broke, and nobody got their orders. And, that was terrible. You need to have measures in place to fix that. Like, you should really get someone to put those measures in place. Like, that'd be great. They're like, "But I expected you to fix it." So I guess what I would say, the same advice to the fifth lines is true for the 3-5s. Keep it practical. When it's unconscious, it's a little bit like it supports your conscious process. Like, you're not really interested in saving the day. You're interested in seeing how stuff works. Third lines make the best scientists in the world. The best scientists because they want to see how everything works. And they also make great business people. I mean, the third line is really at the heart of the process. If we consider that there's only 5 lines, really, it's actually the center line because the sixth line is kind of out of the whole thing. So the third line, it's also the very first profile is the 1-3 containing the third line. The middle profiles are the 3-6 and the 4-6. These are these profiles where it changes over that contain a lot of third line because all the 6 lines have to go through a third line phase. The last profile is the 6-3 containing the third line. So we see that in the profiles, the third line is vastly overrepresented, and it's because of how integral it is to the process of evolution. The third line is the evolutionary line. How does evolution work? Trial and error, right? How do you succeed at business? Trial and error. You test things out. The other thing is the third line is the most resilient. The most resilient. 1-3s have like incredibly resilient bodies. Their third line body is so tough. It can take such a beating. It's amazing. It's not like 5-1. We have really fragile. Our first line body is really fragile. Or the 6-2, who often has certain really tough in a lot of ways, but they have certain specific things that can get to them. I guess because the second line has a theme of like the proverbial, it's like an Achilles heel where a certain thing will get through their defenses. They have all these walls, a certain thing gets through. The third line doesn't have that. The third line can basically fall down, get back up again, fall down, get back up again, over and over and over. They can handle so much. My advice to the third line is never hide your mistakes. Don't let anybody shame you for mistakes. And in fact, tell everyone, because that's the great gift. Like a 3-5 can get out of a lot of grief by sharing so much of their life experience with people in a very practical way. My joke about the 3-5 is they're out there running, and they're going for a run, and they go smack into a brick wall that somebody's put up in the running path. And then they just get up, dust themselves up, climb over the wall, keep running. And they never tell anybody. And if you actually could tell all your friends and go, hey, by the way, there's that wall there, don't run into it, you'd be helping everybody else out. The third line is extremely good at trying it out themselves, and by a certain age, they've really seen what happens if you do a bunch of different stuff. You've really seen what happens. You can kind of, in a way, the most experienced, and you can save others, because it might destroy somebody else, but the third line's built to handle it.
But 6s are 3s up until their 30s?
Yeah, the sixth line goes through the third line process until their Saturn return. That's when they begin this journey of leaving the third line process behind. So they don't really actually leave it behind until their mid-30s, usually. But they get glimpses of it at the end of their 20s. And basically the sixth line is going to go through that third line process and just keep making mistakes and having so much. They really go through the meat grinder. The sixth line's a really rough time of it because they're not equipped to handle it the same way the third line is. And so it really damages them. And we'll see when we go into the bonding strategies that the sixth line is really looking for a soulmate. So it's much more traumatizing for them to go through this whole trial and error mistake process when they're looking for a soulmate than for the third line, which, as we'll see when we get to this, is really just looking for an adventure. The third line's the adventurer. All right, let's take 10 minutes, shall we? Okay, thank you so much.
Jonah, wait. I'm a 6'3" or
6'2".
I'm a 6'2".
Yeah.
I'm a 6'2"? Okay.
Thank you all for watching.